It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we have a hodgepodge episode. Now, we haven't had one of those in a couple of weeks, but there were some things that were happening in the boxing scene and the MMA scene that we felt needed a little conversation. So here we are, shortly after Christmas and shortly before the new year. But before we get into all that, let's check in with John and see how his holiday has been.
Yeah, you know. No, it's fine. I'm in Minnesota visiting, taking care of my mom. I rotate between my two brothers to watch my mom, and I took her to all the relatives. So I'm still sitting at the kids' table.
6'3" John at a kid's table makes me laugh.
Yeah, I'm at the kid. Yeah, well, it's the 50 plus and something guy sitting at the kids' table. But the kids love me, which is weird because they won't come up to show me their toys. They won't leave me alone. I don't know why, because I'm not like I think I treat them like an adult because I don't give a shit about their toys. They love that because everybody else fakes, interest and nicety. They're like, this guy gets it. And they just sits there and they just, and I'm just like, okay, let me see what you got. Dinosaur and that can come apart and an elephant that can come apart. Now you put the dinosaur head on the elephant. Good job. You don't know animal anatomy at all.
They don't feel the threat of another person eyeballing their toys. That's the key. Yeah,
I would have taken them. Those toys could have been mine. I would have walked out with them. But for some reason they're pleased to have me at the kids' table. So,
well, I'm pleased to have you at the adults' table for tonight, and then we'll send you back to the kids' table and let them handle you from here. But for now, let's talk about the UFC antitrust lawsuit because there's been another development, and that is that the plaintiffs' attorneys have filed their request for compensation with the court. How much are they asking for?
Well, this is basically all their compensation they're asking for. People know this is the attorneys basically work for free. It was, they are paying for everything themselves. And so what they're asking for is their fees, their split of the take, their expenses, all that good stuff. So if we go through it, they're asking for 30.7% of the total pot. That's going to be their share of the compensation. That's the first part of their fees. The second thing they're asking for is compensation for all the expenses they put out, actual expenses. They're for the 30.7% is supposed to cover all the attorney fees because the attorneys work for free. So they do what's called a lodestar. They get a multiplier. They add up all their hours and the rate they charge, and then they come up and then they multiply it by how good the case is. The judge has to agree to that. And so that's that total money. So the 30.7% will be about $115.2 million. The expenses, which covers their cost of flights, the data storage, all the experts that they had to pay out of pocket, all the stuff they had to pay out of pocket that people did not work for free on, or hotels, flights, stuff like that. They're asking for $9.8 million for that, which is kind of surprisingly low. Actually, I think Paul Gift commented on Twitter about this. That's a lot lower than I think we estimated what it would be. So on that part, the fighters aren't going to pay as much. And then the final thing is the 5 named plaintiffs, because Nate Quarry's no longer a plaintiff, although he is, I think, in a different way going to get paid the same. But for the 5 named plaintiffs, they're asking for a $250,000 bonus for John Fitch, Kung Lee, who's the actual name, the name on the case, Brandon Vera, Javier Vasquez, and Kyle Kingsbury. So those 5 guys that sat through this case, brought the case, and did all that, they're going to get a $250,000 bonus on top of whatever their claim is in the case. And you add all that together, and that leaves $252 million left over for the fighters. Which is very close to what the estimates we gave out. In fact, it's probably a tiny bit higher than what we estimated. So when you listen to our episodes, when we talk about the fighter estimates about how much you'll get, add a couple percentage points to that, because you'll be making a little bit more.
With that 30.7%, that's actually lower than the standard 1/3 that attorneys take normally, correct?
That is correct. For the original amount that they settled with the defendants back in May, the amount that they said that for Lee v. Zuffa that they had settled originally that the judge rejected, they're asking for 33.33% of that. But they're asking for a lower percentage for the additional amount that they got on top of that after the judge rejected the original settlement. So you add those two together and you get 30.7%. I can't remember is it 20%? I think it's only 20% they're asking for the additional 75 million, but it might be a little higher than that, or 25. But you put that together and the total is going to be 30.7%. When you add in their expenses, we get up to almost a third, a little under a third. When you have the expenses and the named plaintiffs' bonuses, which I don't see how any fighter can complain about the named plaintiffs getting a $250,000 bonus. Those guys actually did something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that for 10 years of service, I don't think they're asking for too much.
Not at all. Not at all. So even with their expenses, they still fall under that typical lawyer takes a third threshold.
Yeah, they will be a little bit below that. This is what they're requesting from the judge. Now, the judge can reject this. The judge can go back and say, you know what? I don't think you did a good enough job, or this is still too much. I am going to lower this. And so the percentage that the fighters end up with, the plaintiff's attorney's percentage might end up lower and the fighters might end up with more money. I have a gut feeling based on just talking to attorneys that he will let this go through. He didn't seem that upset with the plaintiffs with their case, even though he's the one that had to push for them to go back and negotiate, and he got the additional 75 million. But he did not seem upset with them when you listen to the hearings that they had. So my guess is he grants this. It's just a guess, but I'm guessing he grants it. But there is a chance that the judge says that's still a little too high. I am going to award you a slightly lower amount, or much lower amount, and whatever's left over, the additional money will go to the fighters. But right now, I think it's safe to say the fighters will at least get on this settlement. They will get to split $252 million. So in many ways, you can look at it as the attorney serving the function of as a coach and a manager taking the share that they would normally take in a fight.
All right.
And so hopefully, since you're paying the attorneys already, hopefully fighters realize you don't have to pay anybody else.
Exactly.
So be careful of signing another attorney. Be careful of your manager asking for a cut. Make sure you only pay the people you have to pay.
Exactly. That's the key right there. That's the bottom line. Now, let's talk about PFL for a little bit, because Patricio Pitbull has been super, super vocal over the past several weeks on X, Twitter for those old heads that refuse to call it X. And he has been vocal about one of two things. He either wants a fight ASAP or he wants his release from the PFL. And I mean, just this past week, he noted that the promotion's brass weren't going to allow him either. So can you tell us exactly why the PFL is doing this?
Well, they're fighter friendly. And to be fighter friendly, you've got to make sure your fighters can't move on. I'm kind of knocking them, but this is a lot of promotions act this way, so you can't be too surprised. But it is funny, as I've been on a Who kick lately, delving back to my old Who records, the song "Won't Get Fooled Again" comes up, and it's people haven't heard it should listen to it because it sums up whenever people get excited about someone new showing up. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Every new promotion comes in offering that they're going to be different, they're fighter friendly, and then fighters get upset with them. So nothing surprising there. What's interesting is the back and forth is Pitbull, discusses. He says, I had a 6-fight contract. You didn't supply me my 6 fights. PFL says, no, we gave you all 6 fights. We lived up to our obligation. You look at it, it was 4 Bellator fights and 2 Ryzen fights he had. So technically, that seems like the Bellator part of the contract is only delivered 4 fights, because that's a different promotion that he signed different agreements with. At least that's my understanding, asking around with Ryzen. Those were not part of his Bellator contract, because if he did, he would have fully completed his Bellator contract at that point, except for we'll get to the championship clause in a second. But that was part of his agreement, was he could sign that, they gave him the right, that they'd give him permission to go fight for other promotions, and he got permission, signed a deal to fight with Ryzen. So, he's claiming, and I think the Pitbull is more accurate here, Patricio, because he's claiming he had 4 fights, 2 left that he hasn't gotten from the promotion, but he had 2 Ryzen fights additionally. PFL is claiming, no, we supplied those Ryzen bouts. Those count as part of your contracted fights. So either way, he's, under that, if you listen to PFL, he's finished his agreement, but he has a championship clause. And because he won the championship, they extend the contract, the termination date, as they say, for 1 full year or 3 fights. And this is where it gets a little dicey, because according to Pitbull on Twitter, he claimed that his fight contract, I think, is up in, is it May, he said? March or May?
May.
I think he said May. My mistake. So May, his contract will be up in May, because that's the 1 year from the additional part for the termination date for the champion clause. But since we have old Bellator contracts, or not old, even recent ones, the ones that were signed right before the merger with PFL, looking at the terms, I'm a little nervous about that he might not be 100% correct. And I'm going to read some terms for you, okay, from some of the contracts we have. Initial term: the duration of the promotional rights shall commence on the effective date, defined as the date the contract is entered into, and then after and end 18 months after the date of the first bout. During that time, the fighter has to fight. This is a different contract. So the fighter has to fight 4 bouts during that time, promoted by the promoter pursuant to this agreement. Okay, so prior to the termination date, fighters shall be obligated to participate in at least 4 bouts promoted by a promoter pursuant to this agreement, subject to the extension terms set forth in paragraph B below. So we go to the next paragraph. If at any time during the term promoter declares fighter the champion of his weight class, the term shall be automatically extended for a period commencing on the termination date, including any other applicable extension terms as set forth in this agreement, and ending on the latter of 12 months from the termination date, or the date in which the fighters participate in 3 bouts promoted by promoter following the termination date. If you look at that extension period, this one says it's the latter. So it'd be the 3 fights he'd have to finish first. Now, his contract might be different. It might say the earlier. But the part I'll note is I'm hoping in his contract, if you went to the previous terms I read, prior to the termination date, fighters should be obligated to participate in at least X number of fights. That's as I showed this some lawyers, that's a very undefined terminology that they're using there. That suggests that you have to actually, that the length of contract is not that important. What's important is you have to finish all the fights in the contract. So I'm hoping he does not have the same terms in his agreement, because not that he couldn't get out of it, but the problem is if PFL wants to be stinkers about this, this is something that would let them drag on the contract for a long time and basically put them through the ringer to get out of this agreement by pretending it's not terminated yet and it should be extended longer.
On that, there's no parameters whatsoever as to the dates that they have, like the time frame that they have to get him those 3 fights. Like they could literally just drag this thing out for 10, 15 years if they wanted to.
Well, again, we don't know for sure if this is his contract. Sure. This is some of the Bellator contracts had this language. The dates, the terms are in there. There is a termination date. There is a commencement date, effective date. There is a length of time to the termination date of the champion clause. So all that's set, but there's some really weenie language in there, some really loose language thrown in there about you're obligated, which could throw a wrench into it. So everything else is pretty clearly defined, except for that you're obligated. The other thing is if the championship clause says the latter of the terms, because the latter is then it's not 1 year. It's like, whatever takes the longer, and whatever takes the later, I should say, not the latter, the later of the terms, 12 months. Well, if you only had 2 fights in 12 months, you still got to finish your 3rd fight. So that's the other issue. So it depends on this contract language. Now, I think he could challenge this, especially the obligation part. If his contract says she'll be obligated to participate and has these other dates, this is something I think you could go to court over. and get the court to rule that this is a one-sided contract, unfair. But again, you have to take the risk of going to court. The good news is all the Bellator agreements I saw do not have of the star ones that were signed previously, especially in the terms. I think his was signed, 3 years ago, he said, did not have an arbitration agreement. So he would not be forced to go to arbitration. He could actually take this to a court if he wanted to. So if he wants to, he could probably take it to court, and they probably do what they did with Masasi and release him, I would guess. But at the same time, they might be nervous that other fighters are going to follow the same path and fight him to try to keep him from leaving, to basically, I think that's part of their concern, is they do not want to let him go, because then they might get just a large number of other fighters trying to follow the same path to get out of their agreement if they're not getting fights. So they might be, holding the line with him. So he might be looking at something where he has to confront them over this. But I do think, because there's no arbitration agreement, because this language is one-sided and not very well defined, this is something he could potentially win in a court.
Bearing that in mind, what would his options be if he wanted to take that to court? What would he do? Would he just contact any lawyer? Would you recommend someone? Would you recommend, say, MMAFA, Rob Macy, all those people?
Honestly, I would call Macy, because you might get it for free. Okay. There's a chance, maybe not but at least for expenses, right? So you might get a discount for him, and I'm sure he has thought up. We know from having him on the show, he has gone through contracts and thought up tons of terms and methods to get out of contracts. He's just waiting for fighters to call him to do it. So yeah, I'd probably call him first, but his team, his management might have solid lawyers, attorneys on their side that have read through the contract and have a plan. But either way, I would, if you have attorneys that his team works with that are capable, you could work with them, especially if they're already being paid from the management side. Or call Macy. Listen, you can't go wrong, because the guy's out there ready to do basically, dirt cheap work. I don't want to say free, because I'm sure he has expenses that have to be covered, but he's basically willing to do stuff for nothing to help fighters. So, I would take advantage of that. You could also try Eric Kramer for free advice, although I'm not sure. Is he a contract lawyer?
I'm not
sure about that. Yeah, he's also Canadian. So it probably wouldn't be helpful to get a Canadian who's not licensed in the United States.
Right.
So yeah, go for one of the other guys, and then file a lawsuit I think they're based in New Jersey. That's the one problem. New Jersey's not very good for fighters. That's where the venue of law is. So you'd have to file in New Jersey, but still, you could file in New Jersey. I'm not sure if they have new agreements. I know PFL, I think, is based in Delaware or New Jersey, the choice of law. I can't remember. But your old Bellator contract would be in New Jersey, so you could file there. And hopefully, get them to look at it, get an expedited case, get maybe an injunctive relief immediately. Because the good news is I do not believe they have arbitration agreements in any of the Bellator contracts.
What about... You always talk about the best thing to do is for one of the foreign fighters to file in their country, because they would allow the contract to be viewed or something like that. Would that be something beneficial here?
Well, not technically, because the contract is it's a contract for under American venue. And so it's an American contract where I think foreign fighters would have a benefit is to challenge the MMA contracts and the promotions behavior in either labor courts there under labor law, because a lot of the stuff they do violates labor law. And then I think we were mentioning this on Twitter the other day. In Europe, looking through certain cases, it does look like MMA operates on a industry that violates antitrust law under EU law. So that's another activity you could try to file there. But one fighter might have struggled with that by themselves. You probably need to find some assistance. But here, the good news, though, if he can do this, if Pitbull took this path and he went to New Jersey and filed, this could affect probably a lot of Bellator fighters in PFL. So, because it's not an arbitration agreement, it could set precedent. Other fighters could follow the same path then. The other thing is, I think we mentioned on Twitter, he could also file and claim an industry-wide restraint of trade. So it wouldn't have helped just Bellator fighters, could help all fighters in all promotions, PFL, UFC. So that's another option, but that's a little more complex than just going straight forward to New Jersey. and claiming that you are, the terms of your contract have honored it, and that you are being unfair or unreasonable in your interpretation of the contract.
All right. So let's talk about Queensberry, because you looked at some financial information from them and were kind of bowled over. So why don't you explain exactly what you saw and why it's so significant? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!